This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Burkina Faso begins trial of 14 people over the 1987 killing of former President Thomas Sankara. Tunisian Prime Minister Najla Bouden names her new government. And world leaders to discuss efforts to protect nature as the UN's Biodiversity Conference opens in China. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, and here with the latest in business is Rama.
That's right, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in the next half hour. Egypt's annual inflation rises to 8% in September. That's the highest level since December 2020. And Kenya's coffee production has fallen for 2 consecutive years, effectively pushing the country even further behind the top producers of the commodity on the continent. That's Ethiopia and Uganda. We'll have the details on the stories and plenty more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thanks for that, Rama. Let's head over to Burkina Faso, where the trial of 14 people accused of plotting to assassinate former President Thomas Sankara began on Monday. Sankara, who was killed in 1987, is seen by many as a revolutionary. Blaise Compaoré, another former president, was in absentia charged with being complicit to the assassination, charges he denies. Compaoré's former head of security is also being tried in absentia. Tunisian Prime Minister Najla Bouden has named the members of her new government. Bouden and members of the cabinet she appointed were sworn in before President Kais Saied during a ceremony held at the Carthage Palace. Adnan Shiwashi reports.
Tunisian President Kais Saied has signed the decree naming Najla Bouden Romvan as Prime Minister and her cabinet members. The cabinet comprises 24 ministers and secretaries of state, including 9 women.
This government responds to the demands of its people with its openness to different views and parties. We have kept the same structure of ministries in order to guarantee the continuity of the work of the administration, and so that the government can start working immediately while developing the functions of the ministries in order to achieve the state's objectives.
The head of state noted that Tunisia is facing unprecedented challenges. Kais Saied urged the new premier to work on improving the situation in the country.
We are experiencing historic moments that we will make together. These moments are difficult and full of challenges, but our belief in success and determination unites us. Together, we will succeed in taking Tunisia out of this difficult situation. Tunisia is open to everyone.
Political analysts assert that Najla Bouden should address the urgent social, financial and economic crisis in Tunisia.
Announcing the government lineup is important at this crucial period because the exceptional measures lasted more than 2 months while the economy was suffering socially and economically. The new premier and her cabinet need to start working as soon as possible to provide some $6.7 billion to the state fund. This amount is vital for the supplementary state budget to pay salaries and expenses in the next 3 months.
President Saied declared that the new government, as well as state structures, will start dialogue with the Tunisian people and representatives of youth, particularly in inner regions. Prime Minister Najla Bouden said that her cabinet will focus on solving the urgent social, health and economic problems. Bouden added that the COVID-19 crisis has exposed and exacerbated inequalities in the country. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Let's turn to Algeria now, where President Abdelmadjid Tebboune says the return of the country's ambassador to Paris is conditional on France showing that it fully respects Algeria. Last week, Algeria recalled its ambassador to France after French President Emmanuel Macron was reported by newspaper Le Monde to having said that Algerian rulers had rewritten the history of its colonization based on a hatred for France. Algeria gained independence from France in 1962 following a war which claimed the lives of over 1 million Algerians.
It is conditional to the respect of Algeria, full respect of the Algerian state. France should forget that Algeria was once a colony. It is a state with all its pillars, its strength, its strong army, its strong economy, its people who do not cave to anyone except God Almighty. If it is on these grounds, then yes, I bear the responsibility of a people, a nation and a history, and history cannot be falsified as we want. And as for what remains, it is their internal affairs.
The world's largest biodiversity conference in a decade opened in China on Monday. The city of Kunming is hosting the UN's COP15 meeting, where world leaders will discuss solutions to better protect nature. My colleague Tian Wei is in Kunming and sent the following.
Once a polluted lake, it is now a showcase of the strong determination to protect the environment. Strolling along the Dianchi Lake in the city of Kunming, one could hardly imagine 10 years ago the lake water was green and stinking. But these pictures do speak for themselves. That change has been taken note by delegates attending the ongoing COP15 or UN Biodiversity Conference. They need inspirational case studies like that of the Dianchi Lake to rally the world and encourage confidence in reversing the trend of biodiversity loss.
We need best practice sharing for sure, and we need science, and we need all kinds of innovations that not only supported by the government agencies, but also by involvement of all communities, including business, including education researchers, and including the private companies, so we can come together as a global communities, so we can really share a future for all life on Earth.
Since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, humans have viewed nature as a source to extract raw materials, energy, minerals, timber, you name it. In the last 50 years, though, wildlife populations have on average declined by 60%. Around 1 million animal and plant species, almost a quarter of the global total, are threatened with extinction. There were earlier attempts to solve the growing problem, but the deadline for goals set earlier were hardly met. So the 5-day meeting is to set the stage again for a new global framework to reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. The draft of the proposed new framework lists 21 targets for urgent actions. The main proposals protect at least 30% of land and of sea areas globally, and increase funding to at least $200 billion per year on that. Now, delegates from all over the world are presenting their views at the ongoing COP15. What they realized together is, even though there were progress being made earlier, there's no breakthrough. What they need now is both being ambitious and inclusive in setting the goals, and even more importantly, actions and results. Tian Wei, CGTN, Kunming.
This year's conference revolves around the theme of ecological civilization, which is a key Chinese policy. Here are more details of the meeting.
Known as the kingdom of animals and plants, China's Yunnan is gearing up for the world's biggest biodiversity conference in a decade. It's the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. The first part of the gathering will last from Monday to Friday, both online and offline. The theme is ecological civilization, building a shared future for all life on Earth. Yunnan province offers a window into China's biodiversity. Although it only takes about 4% of the country's land area, the province is home to more than half of the species found in China. The meeting aims to draw a blueprint for biodiversity conservation. A declaration is expected to call for better protection of species and organisms and sustainable development. The second session will be an in-person event scheduled for next April and May, also in Kunming. It has been nearly 3 decades since the UN Convention on Biological Diversity took effect in 1993. With more than 150 signatures, the treaty has 3 main objectives: the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of biological diversity components, and to fairly share genetic resources. Officials say the gathering will provide a great opportunity for the international community to explore actions to achieve these goals. Around the world, biodiversity is now being destroyed at an alarming rate. Experts estimate that dozens of species are disappearing every day. And some say it's become more important than ever to work together and build a shared future for all life on Earth.
In Africa, climate change is reported to be affecting the habitats of several species. The World Meteorological Organization describes the continent as being exceptionally vulnerable to crises associated with climate change, including food insecurity. CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy reports.
Climate change is an existential crisis for the entire world, yet poor countries are particularly vulnerable.
My country and the parts of Southern African region continue to experience the devastating impacts of climate change.
Our actions today determine the future of our planet in terms of climate change.
Uganda, just like most countries, continues to experience biodiversity loss to the extent that some wildlife and other living species are now in danger of extinction.
Africa is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world to climate change. The limitations of many African countries to adapt has caused untold suffering, and yet many African economies rely heavily on agriculture for survival. According to the World Bank, agriculture contributes approximately 24% of Africa's gross domestic product. The World Bank projects that agriculture and agribusiness in Africa will grow to become a $1 trillion industry by 2030. But extreme weather conditions are reducing crop yields by the day. Now, major cereal crops grown across the continent are being reduced. In West Africa's Sahel region, for example, climate change-induced conflict has driven hundreds into hunger. In the Horn of Africa, below-average rainfall has resulted in crop failure. The continent's biodiversity, which is an important resource for people, has also been adversely affected. Now, forests are home to most of the world's terrestrial biodiversity, covering 31% of the global land area. Now, 93% are natural, and they provide water, livelihoods, and mitigate climate change. They are also essential for sustainable food production, yet deforestation continues at alarming rates. According to the Global Forest Goals Report 2021, 10 million hectares are lost annually. Nearly 20% of the African continent is covered by forests, including the world's second largest tropical rainforest, the Congo Basin Forest. Now, Africa's elephants also play a key role in the ecosystem, but they also face threats of extinction. Now, latest statistics by the International Union for Conservation of Nature highlights a broad-scale decline in African elephant numbers. The number of African forest elephants is reported to have fallen by 86% over a period of 31 years. The population of African savanna elephants decreased by 60% over the last 50 years. As human population rise and cities grow, settlements are also destroying rhino habitats. Now, cyclones Idai and Kenneth, which struck southern Africa in 2019, underscored Africa's exposure to climate change. Now, climate change experts say restoring our forest cover could be the single largest nature-based opportunity for climate mitigation.
The conflict between humans and wildlife has been ongoing for generations. And South African environmentalists report that incidents of human-wildlife conflict are becoming more widespread and frequent. Reporting from Johannesburg, here's Angela Coppola.
The Kruger National Park is one of the focal points for human and wildlife conflict. That's because of the proximity of many communities to the long land and river boundaries.
And we have rivers where we can't actually say we have a fence of any sort. So once in winter, especially when the water goes down in the river levels, you find a lot of lions that break out, a lot of elephants and buffalo that would break out.
The park has established communication channels with local communities and other groups.
In the Limpopo, between organized agriculture and South African national parks, we have a kind of an arrangement on how to deal with them. We usually keep track of those animals. We notify the parks board, And then we see how best we can get those animals back where they belong.
It becomes a bit of an administrative challenge when animals leave the park boundaries.
Once an animal leaves the confines of the Kruger National Park, it doesn't belong to us anymore. It belongs to them. They are the ones that have to take care of that. But we have an early warning system. That system is environmental monitors from the very same communities.
Managing the problem of damage causing wild animals isn't unique to South Africa. Zimbabwe, Mozambique and Zambia have similar challenges.
The real problem with damage-causing animals is when they enter into villages in the deep rural areas and they are then killed in those villages, or they attack people in those villages. But the rules are different there and the attitude towards animals are different there. So in some of those countries, it is expected from farmers to hunt those animals down because they pose a risk, and the capacity is simply not there, not in the state and not in private sector, to herd the animals back beyond the fences where they should be.
The conflict between wildlife and humans is set to continue as those populations increase around the areas where the wildlife stay. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's now take a short break and return. More news on Africa Live, including U.S. drug maker Merck applies for emergency use approval of its tablet to treat COVID-19 infections. And we'll look at some of the security challenges raising concerns in Sudan.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia,
Tanzania. Africa Live. Find your voice.
You're watching Africa Live. We head to the U.S. now, where drug maker Merck has applied for the emergency use of its tablet to treat mild to moderate COVID-19 infections. Merck says its pill, known as molnupiravir, can help reduce the risk of death and hospitalization for those at high risk. The treatment has been developed with Ridgeback Biotherapeutics. If authorized, it would be the first oral antiviral medication. Data released last week shows that molnupiravir could help the chances could halve the chances of death or being hospitalized for those most at risk of contracting severe COVID-19. Afghanistan's Kunduz city is still reeling from a suicide bombing which killed dozens of people at a mosque. It's the latest in a series of attacks since the Taliban took power. Families who lost loved ones in this latest assault shared the following with us.
We lost the kind of people in this blast who really were cadre in their respective fields. They were the kind of people who were not involved in the political dynamics of the country. They were devoting their time to their studies and education. I don't know why these groups, terrorist groups or any other group they may be, perform such acts. I cannot name everyone and every offshoot of these groups. It is unfortunate to say that I, as a young man, and as someone who lost his family members, do not know why such groups carry out such acts.
When the preacher started the prayer, a massive explosion took place, and everyone fell down at everywhere inside the mosque. Many were martyred, scores of them injured, and a number of them were unidentifiable because the flame of the explosives had burned their faces. The victims were shouting to get them out of the place. My two brothers and I were inside the mosque, picking our martyrs whose faces were completely burnt. Everyone was carrying their martyrs outside to the street. It was a very horrific incident.
Well, in Palestinian group Hamas's first meeting of its new political bureau in Egypt, the group discussed various issues with Egyptian security officials. The 19-member Hamas delegation included their leader, Ismail Haniyeh. Among topics they discussed in Cairo were reconciliation efforts and the planned exchange of prisoners with Israel. With that report, here's CGTN's Adel Amrouhi.
Hamas officials do come to Cairo for talks about the Palestinian crisis regularly. But never before has the entire political bureau of the Gaza-based group gathered in the Egyptian capital. Concerns over the future of Palestinians are mounting, and the ruling group in Gaza wants to coordinate more with the Egyptian Intelligence Bureau.
It was clear after Bennett's visit to Washington that nothing is happening and nothing is going on. Maybe Joe Biden will continue the same direction like President Trump was doing before. This discussion leads us to understand both Palestinians and our Egyptian brothers that there is no chances, in fact, for the political negotiation. So we have to work on one important issue to reunite the Palestinians and to continue our struggle by the help of our brothers to regain our rights. That led us to talk about the reconciliation.
Cairo is mediating between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority to see them hold local elections and finally end their rivalry. The step could see the Palestinian Liberation Organization restructured, something that could facilitate possible negotiations with Israel. An economic delegation from Gaza preceded the Hamas Political Bureau's visit to Cairo. Gazans live in dire conditions, and boosting the Strip's economy would give Palestinians their much-needed support.
The siege on Gaza, both sides agreed that this siege must be lifted. We have to work politically on the international level against the Israeli siege. There was a good help from our Egyptian brothers in two directions, on the political level and on the humanitarian and economical level. We will work together to improve that. There was a kind of some agreements and some clear points which we had agreed on. We started with the issue importing the goods from Egypt, which provides Gaza with its needs and good prices on a good also quality. Now we have to start talking about exporting some of Gaza products. Usually we exported agricultural products, but now we are talking about more things.
In May, Cairo brokered a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel after an 11-day war saw record casualties and destruction. Since then, Egypt has been leading major diplomatic efforts to end the Palestinian crisis. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi announced an initiative to assist Gaza's reconstruction. He pledged $500 million to support infrastructure projects in the Strip. Egypt and Hamas are finalizing details of a prisoners' exchange agreement. The deal should see Israel releasing hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. In return, Hamas will hand over at least 4 Israeli soldiers it is holding hostage. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Over in South Sudan, severe flooding is affecting 8 of the country's 10 states. That's according to the UN, which also says that more than 600,000 people have been displaced as a result. CGTN's Patrick Oyet brings us the latest.
Nyayena Galwak is a single mother of 5. Her husband was killed 5 years ago in the civil war in South Sudan. Her children's school is submerged, so they are at home, surviving on food aid and having a meal a day. Nyayena has set up a makeshift tent in this camp for internally displaced people in Bentiu in the north of the country.
I need a tent, blanket and torch to provide light at night. We are sleeping on the wet floor with the children. It's cold and we have lots of snakes around.
Here, floods have already affected 6 of the state's 7 counties, and the rains continue. Key facilities and infrastructures, including government ministries, are in water. All roads leading to the countryside from the state capital have been cut off. Unity State is oil producing and oil pollution is rampant. Clean water is hard to come by and flood waters are dragging the pollutants far and wide, threatening the health of the people.
We want to move
the community from that oil field site so that they can stay far from the oil field so that they will not be affected by this crisis, by this pollution.
The situation is dire for people like Nyayena Galwak, who were already living on the brink after 6 years of civil war in South Sudan. Nyayena had returned to her own home from the internally displaced people's camp and started farming after the civil war subsided. Now, all her crops are washed away. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Hundreds of migrants and refugees are camping outside a UN center in Tripoli. They say they're requesting assistance to escape Libya. Aid groups say many of the migrants now waiting outside the UN center had been arrested over the weekend in a violent crackdown in which several were shot. CGTN's Enoch Sequoia reports.
Armed forces in Tripoli began a series of mass arrests a week ago. Over 5,000 people have been detained in overcrowded detention centers in Tripoli. The situation has led aid and rights groups to voice their concerns. Many of the people are waiting outside the United Nations Center in Tripoli, hoping to get the necessary help to get out of Libya.
I want to leave Libya. I want them to evacuate us from Libya. This is what I want. We are tired, we have no food and no shelter.
Libya has become a major transit point for people seeking to reach Europe in search of a better life. But the migrants here say they have faced violent abuse and extortion while trying to pursue their European dream.
We are not guilty of anything except migrating from our country and coming here on the basis that there is a Human Rights Commission and that we will be resettled to other countries.
Libya's government of national unity says it is dealing with a challenging problem. Meanwhile, the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, says it is trying to help people waiting at the center and is ready to assist with humanitarian flights out of Libya. Enoch Sequoia, CGTN.
Many young people in Africa consider farming to be a profession for the elderly. Despite Africa having a median age of 19 years, the average farmer's age on the continent is 60. However, one group of young farmers in Tanzania says agriculture is a viable and rewarding employment option. They're working to spread the word in the hope of attracting more young people to the sector. CGTN's Isaac Lucando has more.
For the past 2 years, the Kibamba Young Agripreneurs Group has been farming on a 3-acre plot in Dar es Salaam. Consisting of 7 members in their 20s and 30s, the group believes there is money to be made in agriculture. Group member Amos Benjamin says studying an advanced agricultural degree in China convinced him that he was on the right career path.
When I was in China, I saw how agriculture has helped the country transform, carrying out development activities as a result of farming. So I said to myself, on my return home, I would engage in agriculture based on what I saw there.
The group mostly grows horticultural crops and keeps livestock. Its leader says most young people are put off from farming because they deem it a laborious activity.
We must shift from ordinary farming to farming that makes use of technology. Technology reduces costs and make farming very attractive to young people. At the moment, all African countries, including Tanzania, are being fed by old people.
Agriculture remains unattractive to young people who, according to the World Bank, are 60% of Africa's unemployed. Many of them move to urban areas and have little or no interest in taking up agriculture as a source of income.
According to the United Nations, Africa has the youngest population in the world, with 70% of sub-Saharan Africa under the age of 30. Meeting the continent's present and future food needs heavily depends on young people driving agriculture in Africa.
Almost 2/3 of Tanzania's population is engaged in agriculture, but the sector only contributes 26.7% to the country's economy. Some in the sector argue more needs to be done to prioritize agriculture.
Sectors that contribute the most to the country's economy do not have a multiplier effect. They simply do not have the ability to employ many young people. It is only agriculture. If you say 80% of the country are farmers, then agriculture should be given first priority.
At the moment, the group sells its produce to customers close to their farm and provides mentorship to aspiring farmers. The group envisions one day franchising farms across Tanzania, enabling them to share their know-how while providing young people with a viable source of income. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
In our series focusing on African women who've made a difference in their communities, today we bring you the story of an Egyptian philanthropist who's been running her own orphanage and charity organization in Cairo. Yasser Kim brings us his story.
A popular Arab saying goes, "Success is born from the womb of suffering." This applies to Nozed, who turned her personal tragedy into success by helping the community.
I was married when I was in college and had one son. I used to live a good life, work, traveling, enjoying my time, until I lost my only son in an accident, aged 22. Life suddenly turned upside down for me. I felt life had stopped. There was no meaning to it. It was just filled with sadness. I decided to turn this negativity into something that would benefit me, my late son Mohammed, and the community.
Nuzed built a mosque and this orphanage named after her deceased son Mohammed Raghib in a poor neighborhood at West Cairo's 6th of October city. It's not like any other orphanage. She treats the 55 kids inside like her own.
I consider this place their home. I have raised them as my children. I am totally responsible for them until they graduate and get married. I have bought a building to provide an apartment for each one of them. I am looking to buy 2, 3, 4 buildings to have at least 55 apartments for them when they grow up. I opened savings accounts for each one of them and deposit a monthly allowance to benefit them when they grow up, either to set up businesses, for marriage costs, or anything they need.
She didn't stop there. Nozed is also known for helping treat the poor. She opened medical centers in several locations for this purpose.
We have otolaryngologists, pediatricians, internists, gynecologists and dentists. At the mosque, we help orphans, divorced mothers and the elderly. We give them monthly financial aid and regular medical checkups and treat any ailments for free. If any of them needs a big operation, we work with the Ministry of Health to take them to a suitable hospital free of charge. We serve anyone who is in need, but priority is for people living in this area. Most of them are very poor and we know their cases in details.
A philanthropist, Nozed covers most expenses from her own pockets and her late husband's will dedicated solely to the orphanage. The rest are donations from close friends only. Her dream is to help as many orphans as possible till the last day in her life, in memory of her late son. Yes Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, I'll be standing by to bring you more on Africa Live, including the latest in sport. But for now, let's take a look at what's happening in the world of business with Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. Egypt's inflation rises to 8% in the month of September. That's the highest level since December 2020. And Kenya's coffee output falls for 2 consecutive years, pushing the country further and further behind Africa's top producers of the commodity.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
from the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start in East Africa. MTN Uganda has set its initial public offering price for the sale of 20% of a stake in the company at 200 Ugandan shillings. That's roughly 5.6 US cents per share. MTN Uganda is offering 4.5 billion shares in this sale after it secured regulatory approval for that last week. That essentially would value this stake at about $250 million and MTN Uganda as a whole at about $1.25 billion. Telco says Ugandans have first priority, followed by investors from East Africa, so essentially Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda and Burundi, and then investors from outside the region. MTN Uganda secured a 12-year renewal of its license last June after paying $100 million on condition that it listed at least 20% of its shares on the local markets. It reported revenues of over $528 million in 2020, up 9% compared to the previous year, and pre-tax earnings of $128 million. That was 21% higher year on year. Up north, Egypt's headline annual inflation rose to 8% in September, up from 3.3% in the same month of 2020 and 6.4% in August this year. Now, September's reading is the highest since December 2020. The rise was driven by a significant increase in the prices of beverages and food by about 13%. The Culture and Entertainment Services Index was up 6.5%. The Healthcare Services Index was 2.4% higher. Now, the headline monthly inflation number also increased in September by 1.6%. The latest annual and monthly headline inflation data is pretty much within the range of the Central Bank of Egypt. It's targeting through to the fourth quarter of next year, which is 7% plus or minus 200 basis points. 2021's seventh rate-setting meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee is scheduled for the 28th of October. Back into East Africa briefly, Kenya's coffee production has been falling for 2 straight years, and that is pushing the country further and further behind Africa's top producers of the commodity, whose prices rebounded in the international market. Coffee prices in New York are used as a benchmark for global coffee prices. They've gone up by over 50% so far in the year. The latest data from the International Coffee Organization for the 1 year to May 2021 shows that Kenya's coffee production fell from 930,000 60-kilogram bags in 2018 to just 775,000 of those in the 2020 crop year. In the 2019-2020 season, coffee output was down 18%. Output was recorded at 36,900 tons in the season, down from 45,000 tons the previous year. Over that period, coffee production by cooperatives was down 16%, while that of more established states was down by 22% in 2020. South Africa's Business Confidence Index fell in September compared to the month of August. The South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry's monthly Business Confidence Index was down to just 91 points in September from 91.9 in the month of August. Now, the dip has been attributed to lower retail sales volumes, higher fuel prices and energy supply concerns too. The state-owned power utility Eskom has extended its scheduled power cuts until the 14th of October after a series of additional faults at some of its coal-fired power stations. South Africa's economic output contracted by 6.4% last year as the country implemented some of the continent's most strict pandemic restrictions. Unemployment hit a record high of over 34%, with 7.8 million South Africans out of work by the end of June. These power cuts are making it much, much harder for economic output to recover. On to Nigeria now. Tanker drivers at the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation have suspended their strike. That strike was actually supposed to start on Monday, the 11th of October. Union representatives now say they'll give talks with management a chance. The drivers are protesting against the poor state of roads in the country. The Union of Petroleum and Natural Gas Workers say poorly maintained, often unlit, insecure, poorly built roads are putting the lives of tanker drivers in danger. The union now aims to start negotiations with management to improve road safety after the state-owned oil firm NNPC warned that a strike could disrupt fuel supplies in Africa's largest oil exporter. Back up north, Egypt and Saudi Arabia have signed 2 contracts for the implementation of a project to link their respective power grids. Now, the deal will allow the exchange of up to 3,000 megawatts of electricity, and the project is valued at $1.8 billion. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the details from Cairo.
It's a unity of 2 energy powers in the region. Egypt and Saudi Arabia's combined electricity production is around 150 gigawatts. That's about 38% of total production in the Arab world. According to the deal, the 2 countries are to exchange 3 gigawatts from their grids during peak hours.
Egypt's peak hours are after sundown, while in Saudi Arabia they are at noon. During these times, you have to increase production or operate additional power stations, which requires higher energy consumptions. The electricity link will reduce the cost of power production.
3 high-voltage substations in Egypt will be linked with 2 in Saudi Arabia through ground and underwater cables at a cost of $1.8 billion. The project will be ready by December 2024. The deal is part of the North African country's strategy to make optimum use of its growing natural gas reserves to produce electricity.
The peak consumption this summer reached about 34,800 megawatts, and we still had 11,000 megawatts reserves after export to neighbors. We have much more capabilities than our needs. We also managed to increase electricity production from renewable energy to be 20% of total output, reaching 6,600 megawatts from solar, wind and hydro energy this year, and to reach 42% by 2035. In addition, we will have nuclear energy from Dabar nuclear reactor, and soon we will tap into hydrogen energy.
To fulfill its vision to become a major electricity exporter, Egypt had also earlier linked up its grid with Sudan and Libya in Africa, Jordan and Lebanon in Asia, and Greece and Cyprus to export to Europe. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, Sudan's capital is experiencing shortages of essential supplies and commodities due to ongoing protests. Fuel and cooking gas queues have been growing in the city because of a blockade of the main port by protesters. Many bakeries, in fact, have stopped working simply because they can't get the wheat supplies they need. CGTN's Naba Mohideen reports from Khartoum.
Public anger is growing in Khartoum as fuel, wheat and medicines run short. It's caused by a port blockade in the east of Sudan, where roads have been blocked by demonstrators, stopping the flow of goods between Port Sudan and Khartoum. The local airport of Port Sudan City is closed too. The protest started 2 weeks ago, when the tribe leaders said they want solutions to poor economic conditions in the Red Sea region. The eastern tribes also rejected the peace deal signed with rebel groups after the ouster of Omar al-Bashir, and demanded a political representation in the transitional period. The Port of Sudan is the main gateway for imports and exports. It's also vital for oil exports from the neighboring South Sudan. The transitional government is negotiating the reopening of the main port, while the protesting tribes are still rejecting any mediations. Naba Mohideen, CGTN, Khartoum, Sudan.
Away from the continent now, the U.S. Treasury Secretary says she is confident that Congress will approve a deal setting a 15% global minimum corporate tax rate. Janet Yellen told ABC News over the weekend that the tax deal will be included in the federal budget bill that's being debated in Congress. Now, the agreement aims to prevent large multinational corporations from seeking tax shelters in countries with low rates on corporate income tax. The deal now has 136 economies on board. Collectively, they account for about 90% of global GDP. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida says he will look to achieve much better, stronger economic growth before thinking about wealth redistribution policies. Just last week, Kishida had mentioned that adjusting taxes on capital gains and dividends would be an option, and equities in Japan fell as a result. Facing opposition lawmakers in Parliament for the first time since he became Prime Minister on Monday, Kishida vowed to prioritise boosting wages through tax incentives as opposed to imposing higher levies on investment income in order to address Japan's income gap. He says his government's priority is to put the Japanese economy on a relatively solid footing with bold monetary easing and a flexible fiscal policy. The benchmark Nikkei 225 index closed 1.6% higher on the day. And I'll leave you there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. In Global Business, we'll be live in Washington, D.C. Full meetings of the IMF and the World Bank is starting today, but data manipulation allegations against the IMF managing director, who was accused of allegedly pressuring World Bank staff to change data to boost China's rankings in the Doing Business reports when she was a lender CEO, they're threatening to overshadow these meetings. So can Kristalina Georgieva credibly remain as a fund's managing director or not? We'll explore that and plenty more at 1800 GMT. For now, back to Hannah.
Sounds very interesting, Rama. We're looking forward to that. We'll see you in a bit. For now, let's take a short break and return with sport news, including vaccinated fans to watch South Africa play against Ethiopia in the 2022 FIFA World Cup qualifier.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.